If this is early labor, there's no way I can handle active labor. And my water just broke, went whoosh, like all over the floor. I need drugs, like Hey guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm a first-time mom to a baby girl who is now 4 months old, and I thought that I would tell my home birth story because I found it really helpful to listen to home birth stories when I was pregnant and I was planning for a home birth. Listening to home births really helped me to feel a lot more relaxed and just confident in what I was doing. So I'm really excited to share my story with you. It was pretty crazy, but it was the most amazing experience of my entire life. I think about it all the time. I love watching the video of my daughter being born, and it was just a time that I was really, really proud of myself for, and just really shocked at what I was actually capable of doing. So if you want to listen to the story, I'm definitely going to be sharing a few clips and some pictures from my labor and delivery as well. So keep on watching. For me, when I was pregnant, once I hit around like 37 weeks, which is when you're considered full term, I believe, in pregnancy, I had always thought that she was going to come early. So when I hit that 37-week mark, I was like ready to have a baby, and I was watching every little thing that my body did. I'm like, oh, is this a sign of labor? Is that a sign of labor? So I was constantly thinking that I was potentially going to be in labor. I was drinking red raspberry leaf tea every day. I was bouncing and swirling on a yoga ball. I was going for walks. Outside we have a lot of land back here, so because we live in the country, so I was walking like all up and down our land trying to kickstart labor because I wanted to have this baby. At the time, I was just done being pregnant. I missed wine, I missed hot baths, and I missed sleeping on my stomach. So that was a huge thing. Anyway, so I really thought I was going to go into labor early. And so because of this, you know, my whole family was on edge and everyone is texting asking when you're going to go into labor. To my surprise, I was 2 weeks late. So that means I did not go into labor until I was 42 weeks pregnant. And I remember the last week when I hit that like 41 week mark, I just remember calling my mom and breaking down into tears because I so badly I just wanted to have my baby, and I thought I would have had her by now. So I was a hot mess. My mom ended up coming down with me that week, and we ended up baking Christmas cookies and all of this stuff to help keep my mind off of labor, delivery, birth, all that type of stuff. So the signs leading up to labor, I had every single early sign of labor that they say on like Google or any of that stuff. I was having, and this is gonna be TMI, but we're talking about birth and labor, so if you don't want to hear TMI and things about blood and bodily functions, then I would just click off this video. Anyway, leading up to labor, I had all the signs. I'd had diarrhea, I had thrown up a few random times, a few weird random waves of nausea. I'd had cramping, my baby dropped, I'd have tons of Braxton Hicks contractions. So I really thought that this baby was coming like any day now. Like, it was torture waiting for that child to come out. We ended up speaking with my midwife, and I believe I was 41 weeks at the time, and we decided to come up with a game plan and decided that if I hit 41 weeks and like 4 days or 5 days, right around there, that she would start doing some natural means of induction for me because I did not want to go over that 2-week mark. And natural means of induction should really be monitored by a midwife or someone professional in the field. But there's a couple of herbs you can take, and there's something called castor oil, which I know is super controversial, but again, I didn't even end up having to do the castor oil at all, so we'll just erase that. But we were going to discuss doing those natural means if I had not gone into labor by that day. So it was Tuesday night, and we were going in Wednesday morning to get me induced. And I remember all of us joking, saying, haha, wouldn't it be hilarious if I just went into labor tonight and then we wouldn't have to worry about the natural induction. So it was really weird. So that day I felt completely normal. But that night I randomly had this huge wave of nausea, threw up, and I actually threw up and peed myself at the exact same time, which is really weird, but I'd had that happen like 2 weeks before and obviously didn't go into labor. So I didn't think too much of it. And then when me and my mom were sitting in our living room talking, and all of a sudden I just got this major cramp that was stronger, a really strong Braxton Hicks almost. It was the strongest contraction I'd ever had to that point. But it was just one, and then it went away. And then I think like a half hour later, I got another one of those exact same really like crampy feeling. But I didn't really think much of it at the time. And I think we ended up just going to bed. So we went to sleep, and then around 2:30 in the morning, I woke up to these almost menstrual-like cramps, and they were decently painful, and I remember trying to sleep through them, and I couldn't really sleep through them. I couldn't get comfortable. A few times I had to kind of get up out of bed and move around the room, and I was just thinking, like, is this it? I don't know. They're not horribly painful, but they're painful enough to where I couldn't really fall asleep during them, or they would wake me up. But I kept getting in and out of bed, so I didn't want to disturb my husband. So I ended up going out into the living room, and I laid on the couch, and I tried to sleep in between the contractions, but they were about 20 to 30 minutes apart, so I was able to kind of doze off in between. But when I had one, I would kind of have to get up and move, or just kind of sit there and breathe calmly. Needless to say, I didn't sleep very much that night. I was up pretty much until like from 2:30 to 6 o'clock in the morning when I finally climbed back into bed, and I was able to fall asleep for about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. So that morning I called my midwife and told her what was going on, and she suggested that we still come down, but she definitely thought it was the beginning of labor. So funny thing is, I did actually end up going into labor that night on my own. So we went in and she monitored me, and then she gave me, it was not a sweep. She didn't sweep my cervix, but it was like a cervical massage. I'm not sure what that is. If you know what that is, like, comment it down below or something. I have no idea. But she did do something where she massaged my cervix, and she could feel my baby's head was like, basically the cervix was like around my baby's head. My baby was super duper low, and it hurt really bad. Whatever she did, massaging my cervix hurt horribly, but it did help to kind of speed up some of those contractions just slightly. So we ended up doing that, and me and my husband left, and then on the car ride home I was starting to get some pretty strong contractions, a lot stronger than I'd been having that whole night, and some of them were lasting for like 2 to 3 minutes long. The best way I can describe how a contraction feels is like, it's like a menstrual cramp. It's like this sharp pain that just kind of takes over your whole. For me, it was all in my front section. I didn't have back labor, thank God. I've heard that's terrible. But it was like this sharp pain just all in the front. And that's, I mean, I don't really know how else to describe it until you've like really been in labor. There's no real way you can describe a contraction. I ended up most of my labor sitting on the couch with my mom and my husband, and we watched The Office, and we watched this baking competition, and that kind of helped me take my mind off the contractions. But I was definitely starting to get more intense. I was just trying to relax my body and work with the contraction. I didn't want to tense up and try and make the contraction stop. I wanted to let the contraction work so that my baby would move down. Around 7 p.m., things really started to get intense for me. I ended up calling my midwife, and just telling her like what's going on, because to give you a timeline, I started labor at 2:30 in the morning. Okay, so my camera was just being really weird. Sorry about that. Anyway, I called my midwife, basically complaining to her about how long my labor was taking. And she just kind of encouraged me to keep going. So I think I continued to keep going until about 10 o'clock when I told Luke and my mom that I wanted to use the birth tub. They were getting bad to that point where I told them, turn off the TV, turn off the lights, turn on the music, because I was getting to the point where I really just needed to focus. And they started filling up the birth tub. Luke called the midwife, and she was on her way over to the house. So from that point on, it got really intense. That's the only way I can describe it. Some of my contractions were lasting like a long time, and they were pretty painful. I remember my midwife finally got there, and I looked at her and I said, please tell me this is active labor, because I was so worried that I was still in early labor, and I was like, if this is early labor, there's no way I can handle active labor. And she looked at me, she's like, yep, nope, you're in active labor, this is it, this is the real deal. So it was nice, and we finally got the birth pool set up. And oh my gosh, let me tell you something. If you are doing a home birth or anything, I highly recommend a water birth, or not even a water birth, but just using the tub in general was so helpful. It helped take the edge off my contractions so much. I got in the tub and I just remember saying, oh, thank you, Jesus, because it felt so much better. I was able to focus. I was able to stay way more calm. I was working through my contractions really well in the tub. But the negative thing for me, this is not the case in everybody, so don't let this deter you from using a tub. It started to slow down my contractions because I was being able to relax my body so much. It was relaxing everything, which was causing my contractions to slow down, which meant that baby was going to come later unless my contractions picked back up again. So my midwife had me get out of the birth tub. I remember when she told me that, I was like, oh no, please don't make me do that, because it was just a lot more painful out of the birth tub. But she really encouraged me to get out, so I got out, and I ended up getting in a position on the couch that she wanted me to get in, and her assistant started doing some pressure points on me, and started using a rebozo. If you don't know what that is, Google it. It's like this scarf thing, and they can put it on your belly or on your back and move it like this. It helps to shift baby into a good position, and it can also help to ease the pressure of contractions. So I started getting in this position on the couch, and I remember getting a contraction that brought me to tears. I was just, that was the first time in my mind that I thought, I can't do this anymore. I'm done. I'm tired. I've been laboring. At this point is probably like midnight, maybe even 1 o'clock in the morning. So I had been laboring for almost a solid 24 hours at that point. And I just remember thinking, like, I can't. There's no way I can do this. And my midwife was like, well, why don't I check you? Because I had not been checked up to that point. I didn't ask. I didn't really want to know because I was too worried that I was only like 3 centimeters dilated. My midwife checked me, and she didn't say anything at first, and I said, how far along am I? And she goes, do you want to know? And I said, I don't know. Do I want to know? And she looks at me and she goes, let me tell you, it's very normal to feel the way you're feeling right now because you're 7 centimeters dilated. And I just remember like, oh my gosh, thank God, because I knew 7 centimeters was so close, and I knew that meant I was in transition. I was beginning to be in transition, which made sense as to why I was thinking, I can't do this anymore. If you don't know, transition is the hardest part of labor for most women, and that's a lot of times when women start to really doubt themselves. So having those thoughts is completely normal during labor. But hearing that definitely gave me the motivation to keep pushing through. So I ended up getting on the toilet because my midwife wanted me to sit backwards on the toilet because it would help baby get down into the position and really help those contractions move downwards using gravity to help. And she told me, I want you to give me 2 good contractions on the toilet and then you can get back into the birth tub. And so I remember sitting there, and as soon as my second was over, I said, all right, I'm done. I'm getting back into the birth tub because I want that water. So I got back into the birth tub, and I was in there for a little while longer when my midwife wanted me to get up and walk around because, again, my contractions started to slow down. So I got out of the tub again, and I remember getting this major contraction. And I hugged my midwife during the contraction, and all of a sudden I felt this feeling to push, and it felt like I felt a ton of pressure, and I just pushed, and all of a sudden my water just broke, went whoosh, like all over the floor, and it went all over my midwife's feet, all over my feet. And my midwife was like, well, I think that was your water that just broke. So that was really encouraging to know that my water had broken at that point. And then after that is when contractions really started to pick up. I started getting contractions like every 2 minutes. They were lasting a long time. And I just wasn't getting much of a break. And that is when I ended up asking for an epidural. I actually shouted and said, I need drugs. Like, I want drugs. Because it was just getting intense, and when you're in that period where you're almost to the end, you don't get much of a break. So that was really hard. I think I even remember slipping out the F word once during it because I was just so done, and I was also exhausted. I had not slept in literally 24 hours. So eventually I told my midwife that I wanted drugs. I was done. She checked me, and she goes, you're at a 9 and 9.5. And I just remember saying, what? Like, I am? Like, oh my gosh. It was so nice to be able to hear that. And that's when I knew I could do it. And I remember saying, oh, I want an epidural. And she goes, when she told me how far along I was, I said, oh, I guess it's too late then. Because at that point I knew we didn't have enough time to get to the hospital and get me an epidural at all. Which I'm glad I didn't do. I think I was just in the mental state I was in. Sometimes you're so exhausted at that point you really don't care. So I ended up trying to push in the tub a few times. I kind of had this slight urge to push. Things just weren't really moving along. I wasn't in the best position I could get in. And my midwife really felt like baby was trying to slip under the pubic bone. So she encouraged me to get out of the tub and says, well, we can try the floor. So they ended up setting a bunch of pillows and stuff down on the floor. And my midwife, I remember telling me, when she told me that she wanted me to try and get out of the tub again, I looked at her and I was like, oh, and she was like, well, we don't have to yet. She was like, you can take your time. And I said, well, if we're going to do this, let's do it. So we got out of the tub. I laid down on the floor, and that's when I started pushing, and I started having the urge to push. And the only way I can describe pushing is I told my husband this, you feel like you're pooping out a coconut. It is so much pressure. And for me, that was the least painful part, but it was the most exhausting part because you're using every little bit of energy you have left to try and push that baby out of you. And I was so tired. I remember in between pushes, I was just laying there with my eyes closed, and I would just like stare at my husband and just say, I don't think I can do this. And you know, it was really nice having him. He was there, my mom was there, my midwife and her assistant. Those were the only people that were there at my birth. And he just looked at me, him and my mom, and they were like, you're doing it, you can do this, like, keep pushing through, you're almost done, you're almost there. So I continued to push. I believe I only ended up pushing for about a half hour. And I felt the head, what they call the ring of fire. I ended up pushing, and the head came out where she started to crown, and I could feel myself tear. It hurt, and I think I ended up screaming. They call it the ring of fire. It burned. It was not fun, but it didn't last very long. It was like a couple seconds, and then boom, her head was out, and at that point, all pain in my mind was gone. I didn't care how much pain I was in. I didn't care how tired I was. When I saw her head come out, I was just like, oh my gosh. And I remember asking my midwife, how do I get the rest of her out? And she goes, well, you're gonna push the rest of her out. So I ended up pushing like 2 more times, and she was out, completely out. The cord was wrapped around her neck, and my midwife was fully capable of handling a cord wrapped around the neck. Midwives, home birth midwives are totally capable of handling that. There's a big misconception about the cord being wrapped around the neck. But anyways, she just quickly unraveled it and handed her to my husband, and my husband took her and put her up onto my chest, and it was the most amazing experience. I was in shock. I couldn't believe that I had done that I had a baby. I just remember her being on my chest and just thinking, like, in my head, like, what? There was a baby inside of me? Like, I didn't care that I just ran the biggest marathon of my life. I had the most precious thing to me in the world, and it was just amazing. Afterwards, we ended up breastfeeding right there on the spot, pretty much within like 10 minutes of her being born. My midwife delivered my placenta for me, and then she handed the baby over to my husband, and he got to hold her and do some skin to skin with her while they kind of cleaned me up, and then we got to lay on the couch and snuggle up to our little newborn baby girl. One thing that did end up happening during my birth was that I ended up passing out shortly after giving birth. Now, a lot of people might freak out and say, oh, no, see, this is why you don't do home birth. No, this is why I had a professional with me. I had a certified nurse midwife with me for any complications that were to arise. Part of the reason why I ended up passing out was not because some horrible thing happened. It was because I had been awake for over like 24 hours with literally no sleep. I was exhausted. During the day, I didn't have much of an appetite. I wasn't eating a lot or drinking a lot, which I should have been. I was very dehydrated. And my bleeding was a little bit more than the normal amount. But it was not a hemorrhage. My midwife was totally able to control everything. She took me in and she gave me an IV. She was able to sit me down and stitch me up. My bleeding went away very quickly. She said there was no concern. She said it was just a little bit more than the norm. Anyways, she said it was just a little bit more than normal, but I was totally fine. After I got an IV, I got some food and water in me, and I got some rest. I was perfectly back to normal. It was not a huge thing. There was no rush to the hospital, nothing like that. My midwife was totally calm and confident that I was totally fine. So that was the only complicated thing that happened at all during the entire thing, but the delivery went beautifully and went wonderfully. My baby was perfectly healthy. There was nothing at all wrong with her. So in the end, I had an amazing experience. I would do home birth for every single child that I have. I plan on doing it for my future children as well. So I really hope that this encouraged you to try giving home birth a try, or try looking into home birth, because it really is an amazing experience to be able to deliver in the comfort of your own home and give birth on your own terms, and not have someone else telling you what you should or shouldn't do, or pressuring you to do anything you're not comfortable with. So I really hope that this helped encourage some of you guys. I do plan on making a few more videos for pregnancy, birth, motherhood, things that I've experienced. So if you like it, give me a thumbs up, or don't if you hated it. I don't know. Whatever you want to do. Thanks, and I'll see you guys next time.